July 30th, 1975, 2:45 p.m., Marcus Red Fox Restaurant, Bloomfield Township, Michigan. Jimmy Hoffa stands in the parking lot, looking at his watch. He's waiting for two men, Anthony Giacalone, a Detroit mob captain, Anthony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official with organized crime connections. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. They're 45 minutes late. Hoffa is annoyed, but not worried. He's Jimmy Hoffa, the most powerful labor leader in America, former president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the largest and most feared union in the country. He's met with presidents and mobsters. He's been to prison and walked out unbowed. He fears nothing and no one. At approximately 2:45 p.m., a car pulls into the parking lot. Witnesses later say they saw Hoffa approach the vehicle. They saw him speak briefly with the occupants. Then they saw him get in. The car drives away. Jimmy Hoffa is never seen again. No body is ever found. No witnesses come forward. No physical evidence is ever discovered. The car is never identified. The three men Hoffa got into that car with are never positively identified. Jimmy Hoffa simply vanishes in broad daylight from a busy suburban parking lot without a trace. 50 years later, the FBI has conducted over 200 interviews, excavated multiple sites, pursued dozens of leads, and spent millions of dollars investigating his disappearance. They know what happened. They know who did it. They know why. But they can't prove it because everyone involved is either dead or terrified to talk, and the body has never been found. This is the story of the perfect murder, the disappearance so thoroughly executed that it became legend, the hit so clean that it terrified the mob itself. This is the story of what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa. To understand why Hoffa disappeared, you need to understand who he was and what he represented. James Riddle Hoffa was born in Brazil, Indiana in 1913. His father died when Hoffa was 7, leaving the family in poverty. Hoffa dropped out of school at 14 to help support his mother and siblings. He took a job loading freight cars for a grocery chain. In 1931, at age 18, Hoffa organized his first strike. He and his co-workers were being forced to unload freight cars filled with strawberries in oppressive heat for minimal pay. Hoffa convinced the workers to stop unloading until management agreed to better wages. The strawberries would rot if not unloaded quickly. Management had no choice. They caved to the workers' demands. Hoffa learned a lesson that day. Organization was power. If workers stuck together, they could force companies to negotiate. He had found his calling. He joined the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, a union representing truck drivers and warehouse workers. Hoffa was a natural organizer. He was tough, fearless, and absolutely committed to improving workers' lives. He believed corporations would exploit workers unless unions forced them to pay fair wages and provide safe conditions. By the 1940s, Hoffa was running Teamsters Local 399 in Detroit. He built it into one of the most powerful union locals in the country. He used aggressive tactics, strikes, picket lines, sometimes violence. If companies wouldn't negotiate, Hoffa shut them down. If strikebreakers were brought in, Hoffa's men met them with baseball bats. It worked. Under Hoffa's leadership, truck drivers saw their wages double. They got health insurance, pension plans, and job protections. Hoffa delivered results. But Hoffa's success came with a price. To fight powerful corporations, he needed allies, and the most willing allies were organized crime figures who controlled the trucking industry in many cities. Hoffa made a deal with the devil. He would work with the mob. They would help him organize workers and intimidate companies. In exchange, the mob would gain influence over the Teamsters and access to the union's pension fund. It was a Faustian bargain. Hoffa got the power he needed to build the union. The mob got control over billions of dollars. In 1957, Hoffa was elected president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. He was 44 years old and controlled one of the most powerful organizations in America. The Teamsters had over 1 million members. They represented truck drivers, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, and airline employees. They controlled transportation across the entire country. If the Teamsters went on strike, America stopped moving. Food didn't reach grocery stores, goods didn't reach warehouses, airlines were grounded, the economy ground to a halt. Hoffa understood this power, and he used it ruthlessly. He negotiated the first national master freight agreement, creating uniform contracts for truck drivers across the country. He secured massive wage increases and benefits. He made truck driving a middle-class profession, but he also used the Teamsters Pension Fund as his personal bank. The Central States Pension Fund controlled billions of dollars in retirement savings from Teamsters members. Hoffa decided how that money was invested. He loaned hundreds of millions to Las Vegas casinos controlled by organized crime. He financed mob-controlled construction projects. He approved loans to organized crime figures who never intended to repay them. The pension fund became a piggy bank for the Mafia. Hoffa claimed he was making smart investments that earned returns for the workers. And some of the loans were legitimate, but many were sweetheart deals for mob associates. Money disappeared. Loans were never repaid. Workers' retirement savings were being looted. The federal government noticed. In 1957, the Senate established the Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management, led by Senator John McClellan. The committee's chief counsel was a young attorney named Robert Kennedy. Kennedy made destroying Hoffa his personal mission. Over 3 years, Kennedy called Hoffa to testify multiple times. He grilled him about mob connections, pension fund loans, and union violence. Kennedy was convinced Hoffa was a criminal who had corrupted the labor movement. Hoffa hated Kennedy with a passion. He viewed Kennedy as a spoiled rich kid who had never worked a day in his life and didn't understand the realities working men faced. The two men developed a mutual contempt that would define the rest of their lives. When John Kennedy was elected president in 1960, he appointed his brother Robert as Attorney General. Bobby Kennedy immediately made Hoffa the Justice Department's top priority. He assembled a team of prosecutors and FBI agents dedicated solely to investigating Hoffa. They called it the Get Hoffa Squad. For 3 years, Kennedy pursued Hoffa relentlessly. Multiple indictments, multiple trials. Hoffa beat most of the charges. He was acquitted or cases were dismissed. He seemed untouchable. But Kennedy kept coming, and finally, in 1964, he got him. Hoffa was convicted on 2 charges. First, jury tampering. He had tried to bribe jurors in a previous trial. Second, fraud. He had misused Teamsters pension funds for personal benefit. He was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. Hoffa appealed for 3 years. But in March 1967, he entered Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania to begin serving his sentence. Before going to prison, Hoffa appointed Frank Fitzsimmons as acting president of the Teamsters. Fitzsimmons was supposed to be a placeholder. He would keep the seat warm until Hoffa got out. But something changed while Hoffa was in prison. Fitzsimmons realized he liked being president, and the mob realized Fitzsimmons was easier to control than Hoffa. Hoffa had always been independent. He worked with the mob when it benefited the Union, but he made his own decisions. He couldn't be pushed around. Fitzsimmons was different. He was weak, compliant. The mob could do whatever they wanted with the pension fund, and Fitzsimmons wouldn't object. By 1971, organized crime figures had decided they didn't want Hoffa to come back. He was too unpredictable, too powerful, too difficult to control. They were making more money with Fitzsimmons in charge. But Hoffa had other plans. From prison, he lobbied for a pardon or commutation. He reached out to President Richard Nixon through mob intermediaries who had contributed to Nixon's campaigns. He made a deal. If Nixon commuted his sentence, Hoffa would quietly retire and never seek Union office again. On December 23, 1971, President Nixon commuted Hoffa's sentence. After less than 5 years, Hoffa walked out of prison a free man. But there was a condition in the commutation order. Hoffa was prohibited from participating in Union activities until 1980. He couldn't run for Teamsters office. He couldn't negotiate contracts. He couldn't even attend Union meetings. Hoffa was furious. He believed the mob had convinced Nixon to include that restriction to keep him out of power, and he was probably right. Hoffa immediately began planning his comeback. He filed lawsuits challenging the restriction. He gave interviews claiming he had been set up. He started meeting with Teamsters locals, testing his support. He was preparing to run for president again in 1976, arguing the restriction was illegal. The mob watched with growing alarm. Hoffa was supposed to disappear quietly. Instead, he was planning a comeback that would threaten their control of the pension fund. Something had to be done. The mob had a problem. Jimmy Hoffa knew too much. He knew where bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. He knew which mob figures controlled which Union locals. He knew the details of pension fund loans to organized crime. He knew about murders, extortion, and criminal enterprises going back decades. If Hoffa got angry enough, if he felt betrayed enough, he might talk to federal authorities. He might cut a deal to testify against mob figures in exchange for getting the commutation restriction lifted. Some mob leaders wanted Hoffa dead immediately. Others argued killing such a high-profile figure would bring too much heat. The debate went on for months. Meanwhile, Hoffa kept pushing. He was meeting with old allies. He was rebuilding his power base. He was preparing for his comeback. By July 1975, the decision had been made. Hoffa had to go. But it had to be done carefully. It had to look like he disappeared willingly. Maybe he fled the country. Maybe he started a new life under a new identity. But there couldn't be a body. There couldn't be evidence. There couldn't be anything that connected his disappearance to organized crime. The hit was assigned to Anthony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamsters official and captain in the Genovese crime family. Provenzano, known as Tony Pro, had once been Hoffa's protege, but the two men had a falling out in prison. Hoffa had refused to help Provenzano with a pension issue, and Provenzano felt disrespected. When the order came down to kill Hoffa, Provenzano eagerly accepted the contract. The plan was simple: lure Hoffa to a meeting under the pretense of making peace. Once he was isolated, kill him, dispose of the body so thoroughly it would never be found. On the morning of July 30th, 1975, Hoffa received a phone call at his summer home in Lake Orion, Michigan. The caller, according to Hoffa's wife Josephine, was someone Hoffa knew and trusted. The caller told Hoffa there would be a meeting that afternoon at 2 p.m. at the Machus Red Fox restaurant. Tony Provenzano and Anthony Giacalone, a Detroit mob captain, wanted to sit down and discuss reconciliation. They wanted to support Hoffa's comeback. They wanted to make peace. Hoffa was skeptical, but intrigued. If he could get mob support for his return to power, it would make his comeback much easier. He agreed to the meeting. At 1:30 p.m., Hoffa drove to the Machus Red Fox in his maroon 1974 Pontiac Grandville. He arrived early and waited in the parking lot. The restaurant wasn't open for lunch, so the parking lot was relatively empty. At approximately 2:45 p.m., witnesses saw Hoffa standing near his car looking impatient. They saw a car pull up. They saw Hoffa walk over and talk to the occupants. Then they saw him get into the car. One witness, a truck driver who knew Hoffa, later testified he saw Hoffa get into a maroon or copper-colored Mercury Marquis. He saw 3 men in the vehicle. Hoffa appeared relaxed and willing. He didn't seem to be under duress. The car drove away. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jimmy Hoffa. When Hoffa didn't return home that evening, his wife called the police. She told them Hoffa had gone to a meeting and never came back. She gave them the names: Tony Provenzano, Tony Giacalone. The FBI was notified immediately. They knew this wasn't a simple missing person case. This was a mob hit. The investigation began immediately. FBI agents interviewed witnesses. They found Hoffa's car still parked at the Machus Red Fox, locked and undisturbed. Inside the car they found nothing unusual, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, just Hoffa's personal items. They interviewed Tony Provenzano in New Jersey. Provenzano had an alibi. He was at a Teamsters office in New Jersey at the time Hoffa disappeared, witnessed by multiple union officials. He claimed he knew nothing about any meeting. He said he hadn't talked to Hoffa in years. They interviewed Tony Giacalone in Detroit. Giacalone also had an alibi. He was at a barber shop getting a haircut at the time of Hoffa's disappearance. He claimed he knew nothing about any meeting. He said he hadn't seen Hoffa that day. Both men's alibis held up. But the FBI didn't believe them. They believed Provenzano and Giacalone had ordered the hit, but hadn't been personally present. They had arranged for subordinates to pick up Hoffa and kill him. But without a body, without witnesses, without physical evidence, the FBI couldn't prove anything. Over the following weeks, months, and years, the FBI pursued hundreds of leads. They interviewed organized crime figures, Teamsters officials, Hoffa associates, and potential witnesses. Slowly, a theory of the case emerged. According to the FBI's reconstruction based on informant testimony and circumstantial evidence, here's what probably happened. Hoffa was picked up by 3 men. The driver was Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son and longtime associate. The passengers were Salvatore Briguglio and Thomas Andretta. both New Jersey mob associates connected to Tony Provenzano. Hoffa trusted Chucky O'Brien completely. When he saw O'Brien driving the car, he had no hesitation getting in. He believed he was being taken to the meeting. Instead, the car drove to a house in the Detroit suburbs. Once inside the house, Hoffa realized he had been set up. He tried to fight, but he was 62 years old and outnumbered. He was subdued and killed, most likely strangled or shot in the head. His body was then transported to a secondary location for disposal. This is where the theories diverge. Multiple informants have given multiple accounts of what happened to Hoffa's remains. One theory is that the body was taken to a mob-connected rendering plant, where it was incinerated. The ashes were then scattered or buried. Another theory is that the body was placed in a 55-gallon drum, filled with concrete, and buried at a landfill or construction site. A third theory, promoted by several mob associates, is that the body was taken to a mob-controlled funeral home, where it was cremated in a commercial crematorium, then mixed with the ashes of a legitimate cremation to hide the evidence. The most sensational theory, popularized by mob hitman Richard Kuklinski before his death, is that Hoffa's body was put through an industrial trash compactor, reducing it to unrecognizable pieces that were then disposed of in a landfill. The FBI has investigated all these theories. They've excavated the backyard of the house where Hoffa was allegedly killed. They've searched multiple landfills. They've used ground-penetrating radar at construction sites. They've dug up horse farms and parking lots and buried cars. Every search has found nothing. The body has never been recovered, not a bone, not a tooth, not a fiber of clothing, nothing. Whoever disposed of Jimmy Hoffa did it so thoroughly that 50 years of investigation using the most advanced forensic technology available has turned up zero physical evidence. It's the perfect murder, not because there were no witnesses or no evidence at the crime scene, but because the disposal of the body was so complete that the crime scene effectively doesn't exist. Over the years, several men connected to Hoffa's disappearance have died, some from natural causes, some from violence. Most took their secrets to the grave. Anthony Provenzano died in prison in 1988 from a heart attack. He never admitted involvement in Hoffa's disappearance, but FBI investigators were convinced he ordered the hit. Anthony Giacalone died in 1993. He also never admitted involvement, but wiretaps recorded him joking about Hoffa's disappearance with other mob figures, suggesting he knew exactly what happened. Salvatore Briguglio, one of the alleged gunmen, was shot and killed in New York in 1978. He was murdered gangland style, 2 bullets to the head. The hit was believed to be ordered by mob bosses who feared Briguglio might cooperate with investigators. Thomas Andretta, the other alleged gunman, died of natural causes in 2017. He consistently denied involvement. Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's foster son who allegedly drove the car, died in 2020. Until his death, he insisted he had nothing to do with Hoffa's disappearance. But forensic evidence contradicted him. In 1975, FBI investigators found Hoffa's hair and scent in a car O'Brien had borrowed on the day of the disappearance. O'Brien claimed Hoffa had been in the car days earlier on an innocent errand. But cadaver dogs indicated decomposition smell in the vehicle. suggesting a body had been transported. O'Brien was never charged. There wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. But the FBI always believed he was the Judas who delivered Hoffa to his killers. The truth about Hoffa's disappearance is almost certainly known to someone. Multiple mob informants have provided accounts to investigators over the years. The problem is that mob informants are generally unreliable. They lie to reduce their own sentences. They exaggerate their knowledge to seem important. They provide information they heard second-hand or third-hand, presenting it as first-hand knowledge. And critically, none of the informants have been able to lead investigators to a body. They claim to know where Hoffa is buried. But when the FBI excavates, they find nothing. This has happened repeatedly. In 2003, the FBI dug up a horse farm in Michigan based on an informant's claim that Hoffa was buried there. Nothing. In 2006, they excavated a Michigan horse barn. Nothing. In 2013, they searched beneath a suburban Detroit driveway. Nothing. In 2021, they investigated a New Jersey landfill. Nothing. Every few years, a new theory emerges. A new witness comes forward. A new location is identified. The FBI investigates. The media covers it extensively. Nothing is found. The case goes cold again. The Hoffa family has made peace with the fact that his body will probably never be found. His son, James P. Hoffa, who served as Teamsters president from 1999 to 2015, has said the family just wants closure. But he's realistic. He knows the chances of finding remains after 50 years are essentially zero. In 2025, Jimmy Hoffa was legally declared dead 50 years after his disappearance. The case remains technically open, but realistically, it will never be solved. The men who killed Hoffa are dead. The men who disposed of the body are dead. The men who ordered the hit are dead. Everyone who definitively knows what happened is gone. What remains is speculation and theory. Hundreds of books, dozens of documentaries, movies like Hoffa, starring Jack Nicholson, and The Irishman, directed by Martin Scorsese, all telling versions of what might have happened, all based on the same incomplete evidence. The truth is probably simpler and uglier than any of the theories. Hoffa threatened powerful people. They lured him to a fake meeting. They killed him. They disposed of the body using methods organized crime had refined over decades. And they've kept quiet for 50 years because talking about Jimmy Hoffa is a death sentence. In the mob, there's a rule. Never talk about Hoffa, not to friends, not to family, not even to other mobsters. The Hoffa hit is sacred ground. Anyone who talks about it dies. This code of silence has been remarkably effective. Despite dozens of informants and hundreds of interviews, no one has ever provided information that led to a prosecution or recovery of remains. The FBI knows approximately what happened. Names of most of the people involved, but they can't prove it, and they never will, because the evidence was cremated or crushed or buried in a location that will never be found. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared on July 30th, 1975. He got into a car with 3 men he trusted. He thought he was going to a meeting to reclaim his power. Instead, he drove to his death. He has never been found. The men who killed him took their secrets to the grave, and 50 years later, his disappearance remains America's most famous unsolved mystery. not because it's particularly mysterious, but because it was executed so perfectly that despite the FBI knowing what happened, they can't prove it. Jimmy Hoffa built the most powerful union in America. He controlled billions of dollars. He negotiated with presidents and mobsters, prison, and came out unbowed. But when he threatened to reclaim his power, when he became more dangerous alive than dead, he was eliminated with ruthless efficiency. And he was erased so thoroughly that it's like he never existed. No body, no evidence, no justice. Just a car sitting empty in a parking lot and a man who got in and never got out. That's the Jimmy Hoffa story. The unsolved mystery, the perfect murder, the disappearance that terrified the mob because it proved that anyone, no matter how powerful, could be made to vanish without a trace. 50 years later, we're still looking for him. We're still digging up parking lots and landfills. We're still chasing theories and interviewing witnesses. But Jimmy Hoffa is gone, and whoever knows where he is isn't talking. If they do, they'll be next. That's the real lesson of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. Not just that the mob kills its enemies, but that they can make you vanish so completely that 50 years of FBI investigations find nothing. They disappeared Jimmy Hoffa so thoroughly that he became a ghost, a legend, a cautionary tale. Cross the mob, and you don't die. You just stop existing.